Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond-producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109-carat diamond, recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior, with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. Welcome back to the show, James.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure to be here.
Japan will have a new emperor soon. Can you tell us why and how?
Well, officially, the emperor is basically getting old, and that is ultimately what he's saying. He's getting too old to properly perform his duties. So, in a fairly, if not unprecedented, at least unprecedented in the modern era move, he is seeking to abdicate or step away and take off that mantle of emperor and pass it on to his son, I believe. And in order to do so, because there really is nothing set up in the procedures for an acting sitting emperor to dethrone himself, the Japanese parliament has had to pass a special act of parliament in order to allow this to happen. And the question more generally of succession in the Japanese imperial family becomes one of some concern to people who care about such things, because famously it is essentially a patrilineal system at this point, and there are very few male heirs to the Japanese imperial crown at this point to take on that mantle in the future. So there is some concern among the very conservative right-wing elements in the country that do care about these things that there may have to be an adjustment made to allow a female empress, I suppose, at some point in the future. But at any rate, yes, the Japanese emperor is simply getting old and wants to stop performing his duties.
Well, Prince Philip has announced his official retirement from public duties, and we can think back to the last pope. He was the first one, I probably think, in centuries who's decided, it would be nice to enjoy retirement instead of, dying working on the job.
Indeed, and since the Japanese actually have a name for dying while working on the job, karoshi, this is a country where that may be seen as a bit of a luxury. Of course, it doesn't really affect the average Japanese person in their day-to-day lives, but it is still something that is of great significance, as I say, to the very strong right-wing nationalist movement here that still believes, still officially believes that the emperor is literally a god or a descendant of the gods. So this is part of that sort of mystical Japanese imperial god worship religion part of statecraft that goes on here. But I think, again, for the average person, this doesn't have a lot of meaning.
The Japanese stock market seems to be booming just like the North American stock markets. What's behind that?
Well, there's a number of things that people are pointing to that are signs that the Japanese economy is certainly doing better than it has been in the past few years. For example, officially the economy has now registered its longest growth rate or run of growth in a decade. And companies are also investing more in capital. And earnings have also strengthened with dividends and buybacks at records, and the unemployment rate is at its lowest since 1994. And all of that is putting a lot of confidence in investors here in Japan. And also, and although this is only generally mentioned as a sort of brief aside in these types of stories, the BOJ, the Bank of Japan, is still the primary buyer in the Japanese stock market at this point, with they've officially set aside 6 trillion yen, that's $53.8 billion, as their purchase target for Tokyo Exchange-related funds, or ETFs. So the BOJ is still silently helping to prop up this market, but at any rate, it is definitely booming at the moment, and in fact, it is just 3% off its high from 1996 at this point. So it's definitely booming. The interesting part about this is that it's booming largely in the absence of foreign investors who largely pulled out in early 2016 during signs that the Abenomic rejuvenation of the Japanese economy was faltering. A lot of foreign investors pulled out of the markets and offloaded something like $27 billion from Asian equities in the process. They did not get back in since the June 2016, where we had the recent lows as people were pulling out. Since that point, there's been quite a rally. And so the theory is that if foreign investors become interested in this and start piling into the Japanese markets at this point, then the rally could really take off and Japan could really get, or at least Japanese stocks could really get booming again. So we have yet to see whether that will be a trading strategy that foreign investors will adopt.
Any danger that the Japanese market would crash if the North American markets go down? Or is everything just so entangled, it's hard for one to do something without the other following?
Well, there certainly is entanglement that goes on. And of course, the United States has, for, I think, a very long time, driven global markets in a number of ways, and especially with a strong trading partner like Japan. So that is always something to think about. And I think the clearest example of that in recent days is, of course, the Fed's recent rate hike decision, which counterintuitively has propped up global equities and bonds. You would expect, in fact, people to be getting out of bonds as the interest rates are hiked. But, in fact, the fact that the rate hike has been only a tiny little fraction of a percent and that it's going up so slowly, and there have been signals from certain people in the Fed that there may not be much more hiking after this year, has combined to let people believe that, well, we're in a long-term low-rate environment, so it's still worth buying bonds to try to find anything with any kind of yields whatsoever. So we're starting to see that kicking around the world. So again, even such things as Fed rate hike decisions and the signals that they're giving for the future will affect global markets, and of course Japan being no different. If there were to be a sudden crash of some sort in North American markets generally, then absolutely that would have the direct impact, I think, on Japan, again, as a direct trading partner with the United States, with Canada, but also it would have the secondary effects of investors seeking to take their money and take their winnings off the table.
Has the Bank of Japan set a goal on how much of the stock market they plan to buy?
As I say, they've set aside, 6 trillion yen, which is $53.8 billion for their purchase target for this year.
Which is more than a couple of cents. But in percentage terms, would they own half of Japan's 50 biggest companies, or is that hard to calculate?
That's exceptionally difficult to calculate, especially because they're buying exchange-traded funds more so than direct stocks. So they don't directly own the stocks; they just are invested in the indexes themselves. So it's impossible to calculate exact percentages of individual corporations, but the number has been floated around, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but certainly they have talked about the Bank of Japan becoming essentially the largest owner of Japanese stocks in the stock market.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, housing prices in China have gone up just over 10% year to year. Are they in a big bubble?
Well, essentially, I suppose it depends how you look at that word and what the meaning is. But you're right. Over the March to May period, there was a 4% average gain, which does equal out to a 10% annualized gain. And I think the interesting part of what's happening now is that although that has traditionally been led by the major centers in Beijing and Shanghai and other major urban centers in China, these gains are primarily being made out in the countryside as markets basically around and outside of these major cities start to take off. Now that's, I think, fairly significant because it says a couple of things. First of all, it says that the Chinese clamp down on property development and property prices within the major centers are having some effect. We are seeing some sort of capping on growth rates in the major centers, but it also means that more people are flocking to the countryside, smaller cities in order to try to find property. That, of course, doesn't mean that China, Beijing, and the major centers are out of the woods, as it were, when it comes to housing problems. And in fact, there's a recent story of inspectors in Beijing finding 400 people living in an underground kind of bunker-like environment in a residential and office block that's called Julong Gardens. It's right there in central Beijing, but these 400 people were living in essentially massive rooms with as many 36 beds to a room, no windows, one fire escape for all 400 people, living, of course, illegally in those types of environments. We still see those types of stories coming on, and it's estimated that as many as 1 million people in Beijing are living in such environments, in underground basements and old bomb shelters that have been converted into kind of makeshift emergency housing by people who are subletting it illegally to people who just can't afford regular housing. So, I mean, I'm not sure it's a bubble in the sense that this is simply speculative or simply investment. There certainly is actual demand that is driving this, and that is not likely to let up as China continues urbanizing in its great transformation that it's undergoing right now.
The last time we talked about Chinese policies finally making people look at those empty cities. Are those empty cities affordable compared to established cities?
Well, certainly compared to a Beijing or Shanghai, it's definitely cheaper. But of course, that also means generally that they are further away from where the jobs are and where business is taking place. Now, that of course will change as more people start moving into those ghost cities or formerly ghost cities, and more people are moving into the countryside cities. We will see a gradual change in the business environment I'm sure, to reflect that. But at this point, obviously, since most of the business is happening in the major centers in Beijing and Shanghai and other major urban locations, that's clearly where people want to be and want to be living. And so I think that's reflective of the high prices there, which of course does mean that I suppose there's a relative bargain at this point for some of the more abandoned or the less populated areas. But as I say, that is changing as the recent 10% annualized growth is primarily taking place in those countryside towns.
And you take a look at where China's population is. It's mostly along the coast, just like Canada's population is mostly along the U.S. border. There's lots of empty space apparently in China where people could move to. It's just nobody wants to go there.
There certainly is. And I don't know what most people's impressions of China are, but I tend to think of more the Hong Kong type environment. But of course there is, for example, in Beijing and the northern areas of China, it is more Canada-like with snow and cold weather in the winters. So I mean, it is quite a diverse country in a lot of different ways, and there are vast swaths of countryside. And I think people's impression of a Beijing or a Shanghai or places like that are not really reflective of the country as a whole, in the same way that people's impression of Canada as being Toronto or Vancouver are not really reflective of the vast expanse of Canada.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, Li Ka-shing, familiar to Vancouver people because he bought the Expo lands after Expo 86, says he's about to retire. Is that a surprise, or is it about time?
I really don't know the specifics of his retirement announcement, so I can't really comment on that. But again, perhaps like the Japanese emperor, there are certain times in which it is continuing to try to run an operation of vast size and scope at an increasing age is one that is detrimental not only to his health, but perhaps the health of the venture itself. So, as I understand, he's now 89 years old. So I don't think this should come as a complete shock. It was either going to come through voluntary retirement or perhaps some sort of involuntary retirement due to illness. So I suppose it's probably better if it's planned out in some way.
Alibaba wants U.S. businesses to do more business in China, but how hard is that to do in reality?
It can be quite difficult to break into the Chinese markets. And I think, of course, that is intentional because as a command and control economy that is still centrally administered, it certainly is an economy that is based on connections to the Communist Party. And that is reflected in the fact that, for example, you might remember several years ago there was the melamine scandal with tainted milk powder in China, causing a lot of sick children. And, of course, as a result of that, Chinese now primarily look for foreign milk powder that has been created or produced in foreign countries, especially in Europe. But although you might think that European companies will have benefited from that, of course, in the Chinese system, the way it works is there were a couple of corporations with close ties to Communist Chinese Party officials that basically got the nod from the Chinese government to be more or less the companies to import all of this milk powder from abroad, and they are the ones who have reaped a lot of the economic benefit from that. So you have some newly minted Chinese billionaires who happen to be in the right industry at the right time and with the right connections to get that nod. So I think that's generally how business works in China. If you are on the inside and you have the right connections, you can stand to profit. Otherwise, you're going to have to do business at a remove, basically through an internal conduit of some sort. And perhaps that's changing. I don't know if I've seen many signs that is changing, but at any rate, it is, I think, pretty difficult to break into Chinese markets at this point.
Does Canada have any advantage considering we were the first Western nation to trade wheat to China?
I think the Chinese-Canadian trading relationship is strong and healthy, but I'm not sure it gives any particular advantage per se. I think the Chinese are quite good at finding their relative advantage in trading situations and making the use of that. And I think if you happen to be in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, I think it can be the right situation to profit from. But I'm not really sure that simply having a long-established trading relationship is necessarily going to give you a leg up in China.
Do you have the latest on what happened with the USS Fitzgerald, the destroyer that collided with a container ship that killed 7 sailors? Some people suspecting it might even be terrorism. Or have you heard that?
I don't have the latest of whatever they're talking about at the moment, but I have obviously been following this story. It's quite perplexing, and there certainly seems to be something more to this story than we've been told so far, or at least that I've seen so far. And again, I think there are a number of possibilities that are floating around out there right now. And I think we're going to have to see what develops from this. But it is, again, pretty perplexing the way that this unfolded.
Isn't that area of the ocean heavily controlled? Do they have like controllers like you'd have aircraft controllers telling ships where to go and not to go?
I don't really know the ins and outs of the system, but I find it almost impossible to believe that there isn't some sort of system for avoiding this exact type of accident, which is what makes it so perplexing. And again, I think we'll have to definitely keep our eye on this investigation, because I think there's going to be more that comes out about this. This type of thing obviously does not happen very often, and clearly either there was some sort of intentional nature to this, or at any rate some gross negligence that is definitely going to have some ramifications.
Well, I do know those large container ships have crews a lot smaller than most people would suspect. And maybe it was just on autopilot and the autopilot got confused.
There are a number of possibilities. Again, there are collision alarm systems and things like this that should have alerted anyone, no matter whether it was autopiloting, so to speak, or not, or what the situation may have been. So again, it's extremely, even if there was an absence of officers on deck at the moment that this occurred, there should have been some sort of warning. So again, it's quite perplexing that this happened at all. But again, there are so many factors at play and so many possibilities that I think we'll have to see what more details come out of this.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.